packet pushers.
Hello, welcome to the Network Automation Nerds podcast, where we explore the latest in network automation from a practitioner's perspective. I'm your host, Eric Cho, a network engineer who loves everything about network automation. Today, we're very excited to have a remarkable guest, Bob Belderbos, co-founder of PyBites. PyBites is a thriving platform dedicated to helping developers enhance their Python skills through practical exercises and real-world challenges. Bob has cultivated a vibrant community where learning through doing is the mantra, and Pythonistas all levels come to refine their craft on the platform. In today's episode, we'll dive into Bob's journey with PyBites, using Python for DevOps, and his advice for network engineers wanting to learn and leverage the power of Python. Welcome to the show, Bob.
Thanks for the intro, Eric. Glad to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, it's all true. I mean, we've known each other for a little bit. It's not like we go grab coffee because we're across continents, but I've always followed your work when you're just doing this as a passion project or you're doing it full time now. So it's very excited to have you on the show, man.
Thanks. Yeah, we go back a couple of years and definitely kept in touch. Did we get to know each other through 100 Days of Code and Michael Kennedy?
Yeah, we had Michael on a couple episodes ago. Well, it was recording, but by the time this release, it would have been a couple episodes. Yeah, it's kind of like he's a super connector, right? Just through his show, when we recorded, it was so surprising that it's been 9 years. So like coming up 10 years, and he's talked to so many people. So whatever you want, as long as it's like Python related, he has a connection for it. And that's how we got connected. But you also do your own podcast as well, right? So tell us a little bit about that.
Maybe also as a backstory of PyBites, where that started, right? Like at the end of 2016, my best friend Julian and I wanted to do something online, right? And start a business initiative. And we were both, into programming and coding. And I was using Python for a couple of years, was really happy with it. And he was just starting out. So this was already like a nice contrast. So we literally started with just a tech blog and we started to write every day. And that was all. And from that point, we started to launch these weekly code challenges on the blog.
Right.
And that got pretty popular because like a lot of guides and tutorials are very theoretical and there was not really a code challenge kind of thing in the space, right? So we were pretty new to that back then. And pretty quickly, we wanted to automate that through some process, and we built a platform just to automate the GitHub pull request side of things. But through that process later, pretty soon, we thought like, it would be really cool if you can code in the browser and do like complete exercises in the browser. So we built that platform. Got on the radar of Mike Kennedy, partnered up for some 100 Days of Code courses. This was back in 2018. And yeah, we basically learned Python and shared our knowledge, became a content provider. And then when the pandemic hit in 2020, we started to do one-to-one coaching, right? Because we found that the platform was nice, all the content helped people, but to really become a developer, there's way more you need to know and there are bigger challenges. So we started to work with people one-to-one, and that's now the core of our business. And we've been doing that for 4 years. And yeah, it's really amazing what people can achieve when they have a mentor and build bigger projects. So I would say that that's the main thing we do these days, while still keeping coming back to your question, actually, podcast. We introduced that 3 years ago, and we're 175 episodes or so in. And yeah, so it's almost weekly, and a combination of mindset, developer techniques, Python, interesting guests. I think the motto is all about learning by doing, interesting projects, kind of going back to our philosophy.
Yeah, I love that evolution. I mean, we talked about how you need to evolve with the time. Same with Michael when he was on the show, how, originally he started one way, but now he's doing streaming when he's recording on different platforms, having live audience interactions and videos, right? So I think that evolution is really interesting to me. But let's zoom out a little bit because I got too excited to talk about the podcast and something that I'm passionate about. But let's go back to your origin story and talk about how you come to this place, because you speak perfect English, but you're not living in the United States in these days, right? So tell us a little bit about that. But you did work for like US companies, which I know offhand. So go ahead.
Yeah, so where I go back as a software developer, where that started, and the language aspect as well. So.
Yeah. However long you think it's relevant, right? Like even if you start learning coding back when you were 5, tell us about that.
Sounds good.
Also, a lot of our audience kind of have this mixed feeling about coding, right? Like a lot of them say, hey, I took one Java class in college and I hated it, but I still want to do IT. So that's why I do network engineering. So, whatever you think is relevant, how'd you come here? Were you always like a child prodigy with coding or what?
I was not. I was not. I don't have a CS degree. My
Me
only
neither.
thing that could be relevant is that I have a business economics degree, right? I worked in finance.
Oh, wow.
So, because yeah, if you think about it, it's a good question, right? Like coding is not easy. It doesn't come naturally. You will have thousands of frustrating nights that you're banging your head against a computer, keyboard, whatever. So
Oh, thanks for the encouragement.
now you build these we build these cool tools and you get the fruits of it, but there's actually a lot of work and learning involved. So yeah, so to go back where I'm coming from, so studied finance in Holland. 2004 I graduated. I was only 23 at the time and wanted to switch environments. I'm from the Netherlands and it's pretty cold there, and a bit boring in my humble opinion.
Hey, you said that, right? Like you could say it. If I say it, people's gonna attack me.
Everybody says they're going to Amsterdam, and it's awesome. Amsterdam is lovely, right?
Uh,
But to live there day to day, it was just a bit boring for me personally.
sure.
So I was interrailing at the time once a year, and I got through all these southern countries like Spain and Italy, and got really enamored, really excited about Spain, and started to study Spanish, and I'm going to Spain. So that was in 2004. And yeah, sometimes you have to have a little bit of luck as well, because I had an old connection from a job I was in a few years prior, and he could connect me with somebody in Madrid. And that was for a technical help desk job. And again, I didn't know anything about computers, right? So it was not Windows, it was Unix directly, right? Like command line and and all the technical stuff. So I remember so it was for Sun Microsystems, right? And I remember being in that first week
Mm.
of training, I'm like, what I'm doing here. Like, if you talk about does this come naturally? No, it didn't. Like, I couldn't understand because it was a huge learning curve for me because I didn't even know what a CPU was, right?
Right, right, right. And now you're going from like pictures to actual command lines, and you can't just drag and drop things anymore, especially for Sun, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we had to learn a Vim editor, and now it's my favorite editor. And back then, I was so clumsy. So yeah, it was a big learning curve. But if you just stick with it, over time, it will come. So a few months later, I definitely got the gist of it. Working proficiency. Later, I found out that actually a lot of what programming is automation, and that was something in my studies I was really passionate about. That you have to do a lot of number crunching in finance, and I was always already had that tendency to automate that. Build macros for Excel, right? To not do repetitive work. Then you're basically coding, right? So that was really my first introduction to programming, was to automate Excel.
Oh, really? Did you use Python back then or?
No, that was just macros. That's whatever you could do with Office. So yeah, later it made sense that I would have certain knack for computers and automation. I just had to take this detour through that arduous Unix.
Through automating through macros, the XIO. Yeah.
But now that's actually, I'm really happy about that because, command line and stuff, that's a huge pro as a developer to have that skill set. Yeah. And from there, I went into web development, all self taught, and PHP, Perl. And then one day I found Python and never looked back.
When was that you did like PHP and Pro? What's your feeling from those, right? Like, why did you find Python and never look back? I mean, we all have our own stories behind it, but I'd love to hear yours.
So that was around 2009 that I was developing websites, and I was working still at Sun, and later that got acquired by Oracle, and I
Mhm.
spent 10 more years at Oracle till 2020.
Mhm.
And I kind of grew into a programmer job, but just by building tools, right, for the team. So the obvious choice then was the LAMP stack. So we had PHP and MySQL and Apache. You just went with that, right? And then all of a sudden there was a tool, and I had built it in Perl, and it became a mess. Maybe because Perl doesn't really, it's more like a scripting language. So you don't have classes. And it's also because I didn't know that much about it, right?
Yeah.
So you cannot really blame the language, of course, 100%. But just became a maintenance nightmare. And then asked my boss, like, can I try this in Python? And it'll take a little bit of time, but I think we can build something better. And then it became much more maintainable. And
Did you use a framework or was that just like plain out Python?
no, this was just scripting.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I was thinking even for 2009, there was a few frameworks that were, already pretty mature. And, if anybody wants to do, web development nowadays, nobody would recommend them to just go in like blind, right? Like start writing your client or, just go with the framework. They already took care of a lot of stuff for you.
Yeah, I think back then you already had Django. That was already pretty stable. I didn't know Django at the time. This was more like the scraping tools or parsing tools, right? So it was mostly just pure Python with a little bit of web web wrapper around it, which was then in PHP. Nowadays, I do everything in Django. Just amazing. So yeah, I think it was partially just luck, but yeah, since then, Python has just stood the test of time. It is simple to get started with, yet it's profound. The code is very readable. If you look at the Zen of Python, it has all these design principles you just become to appreciate and are 100% related to clean and maintainable code. So yeah.
I think that's super true, and that's my experience as well. It's just like Perl, it's great, but Mr. Larry Wall, being a linguist, right? Like he's all about freedom, expression, and being able to do many things your own way. And so, while that is great for art, it's not so great for, I guess, computer science because if all of us, you, Bob, and you and Eric, do things very, very differently, then it becomes a maintaining nightmare, and we'll just argue until the sun comes down on which is the best way to do it. Whereas, Python provides these guardrails and maintainability, readability, so that it's more maintainable and we could collaborate a little bit easier. So I think that's a great point. And you mentioned when you were at Sun, you were at least partially part of the tools team. You were building tools for other people. Does that play into your kind of DevOps mindset, or did that help you at all to understand the operators better?
Yes, I would say when you start to develop tools and roll them out, you're dealing with real stakeholders. So the sooner you can get that exposure, the better, because you can develop something in your own mind, but to the end user, it's something entirely different. And you have to constantly deploy it and roll it out, right? So the advantage of a web app is that you push a change and it's there instantly, right?
Yeah.
They don't have to reinstall something locally. So I always have like that pattern, right? That you have that central version and you control it, right? Versus a desktop app, now you have to roll it out. And although these days with PyPI, that would also be pretty easy, but the end user then still has to do like a pip install to upgrade it, right? Or reinstall a desktop client.
Right.
So in a sense, I think it did make me aware of the whole shipping part. And that's generally our advice as well as PyBites. Like, don't sit in your silo, right? Ship your code as soon as possible because then the actual journey starts, right?
Yeah, when you start writing tools that's not just used by you and your buddies, because your buddies much more forgiving, right? So,
Yeah.
so you're like, maybe Julian comes in and go, "Hey, Bob, this thing doesn't work quite as well. Can you just, make some tweak?" Whereas, like an end user would be cutting an angry ticket, right? Like, what the heck were you thinking? And like, this doesn't make sense at all. Have you spent a day configuring a Cisco before? Stuff like that. But I imagine people are much more polite than that. But I'm just giving you an example. Not that I've been on the receiving end of it or anything, wink, wink.
And when you get your first paying customers, there's of course more skin in the game, right?
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about how did you go from just working for corporates, and you mentioned, you and Julian, and you guys have like that nice contrast of, one is a pretty experienced developer and one is just trying to get into the game. You guys both, kind of collaborate on Python. How did that came about, and when did you decide to kind of share your learning, and when does it become a real thing that you just like, hey, I'm quitting my job. I'm going to do this passion project full time?
Yeah, that took like almost 4.5 years, right, to get to that point. And for Julian, because first I went out until he got out, that was like last year. So that was even 7 years, right?
Right, right. He's more cautious.
Yeah, but it was also like you need to be able to afford that, right? If you have then two people on staff. But yeah, we started to build in public in a sense from the start, share learning. We also are big on community building. So from the start, I think 3, 4 months in, we already started to build our Slack community around the whole initiative.
Mhm.
So that has been great. And yeah, so this whole process was gradual and the courses and the platform was always good for a side income, but we had to do something, a higher ticket item, right? Like coaching to really get us off the ground. So yeah, you need to keep growing and innovating, and it's all about the amount of impact you can have, right? So the info products were great, and they still are great, but for us there was a little bit of a cap to that. So yeah, as I said, 2020 when we started coaching, we really just said like, okay, we're doing this great thing, but how can we have a bigger impact, right? And
Right.
turned out that people were not getting into developer positions because you can only learn that much from resources, although ours are more practical because you get the code. Even so,
Mhm.
right? Building project end to end, and also the mindset boost that people need. We found that as our niche and as a way of making bigger impact. Once we launched that product, so PDM, right, the coaching program, and later PDI, Private Developer Init, which is for beginners, that was the kind of product that could go full on because now I would be working one on one with people. And that was kind of the effort of a full time job, but also it had the impact on the business to do that full time.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about that for the mindset and the lessons you learned. Because I find it interesting that you started with technology, but it always comes back to the people. It always comes back to, relationships and your relationship with technology and your mindset on how do you approach a problem when it seems so difficult and insurmountable. So tell us a little bit about that because I think that's the hurdle for a lot of network engineers is that they're already super good at network engineering. They make a great living. And now that you're coming in and say, no, you got to learn this new thing. And this 23-year-old is much better than you at doing this thing. So I think getting over that hurdle is probably to me the most difficult part. So tell us a little bit about that mindset and, kind of DevOps approach that you guys have.
Yeah, because when people come talk with us, it seems that they only have technical problems, right? I don't know async IO. I've never written really extensive tests for my code, and it's like all technical, right?
Right.
Or they might recognize they have like tutorial paralysis, or they're consuming a lot of tutorials and not implementing. They'll often also recognize that they have imposter syndrome because that's a big thing in our industry that we think we're not good enough, right? We always think that the other people know 10 times more and we know very little. And probably the other person we think that of will think the same, vice versa, right?
It's the TikTok of technical world.
This hidden thing, right? But it's a blocker for people,
Mhm.
right? But then also when we really start working together and you're doing these bigger projects and you have to show up a couple of times a week and really put in the effort and really persist through. I mean, we as coaching team, right? We're going to help you. We're going to be alongside you, and we're not going to write the code for you because then you're not going to learn. But yeah, we definitely see people start to struggle there. Right? Things get hard. You have to persist, and you have to keep up that motivation for a period of 12 weeks, the size of the coaching program. It can be very hard, right? Or just to submit code every day, or not to be afraid to ask questions. Well, with us, right, you're in a safe zone because it's a program you paid for, right?
Mhm.
Even so, it's sometimes hard for people, let alone then in the workspace to do that, right? To engage with a senior engineer and really claim your time and the right to ask questions.
I think it's a culture thing too. For some companies, I know there's a safe zone that you feel comfortable in talking to, maybe senior engineers, or you're encouraged to ask questions and they're very nice about it. But at the same time, I've been in environments where speaking purely in network engineering realm, right? Like you'll peek into the senior engineer's room and ask what you think is a dumb question. And you're lucky somebody doesn't throw a shoe at you or something like that, right? Like, how dare
Mm,
you asking this question? And that could be very intimidating. So I don't know. You
yeah.
mentioned a safe zone. So how do you recommend people, I mean, without paying you guys maybe, for the coaching, I mean,
Mm,
which I would encourage because it's great, but if they don't, what are some of your recommendations just from what you heard? You mentioned something about, writing code every day, kind of, manufacture a safe zone if you don't have one. What else would be
mm.
your recommendation in just getting people over that hump,
Yeah, because you raise a good point, right? Like there's some environments that are really toxic and it can be really intimidating and discouraging, right?
right?
I think what we often say within mindset is like you need to focus on what you can control, right? Sometimes you cannot control the environment, but you can control how you develop, right? So are you writing code every day? Are you pushing code out and sharing it every day? Tech blogging seems like from the old days, but it's still very relevant, right? Like I've been to interviews where I could show my blog or my work and it was just added a lot of weight, right? And I might not even have to do the algorithm test because they can already see it from the work, right? That this guy knows how to build software. That's all within your control, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we're big on building every day, sharing your workout, writing about it. Also networking. As I said, when I landed in Spain, that I had that contact. It was a bit of luck, but it might also be that I was proactive about it, right? That I actually spoke up about my plans to go move and. So networking, people sometimes leave that for when the inevitable day comes that they're laid off or whatever,
Oh, in this day of age, right? Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
And again, it goes back to soft skills, right? Like half of this is hard skills or however you want to call it, like the actual code and shipping and sharing. But networking, I would more label that as people soft skill, right? And that's something I think people don't do enough, right?
So if I think back on, sorry to interrupt you, but I do want to double click on the getting started part because you mentioned a bunch of great ways. And I'm sure that's not the first time somebody would hear, yeah, go build in public, go share
Mm,
what you learned. But if I think back on maybe the reason why somebody wouldn't do it is, first of all, imposter syndrome, that, hey, everybody's smarter than me. I'm just not qualified to talk about X, right? But what would you say to somebody about that as a coach, right? Like I said, hey, Bob, I'm not qualified to talk about Python async IO, because I'm only learned it for a week. So what would you say to someone like that in my approach on learning in public?
great question. So I think, yeah, that can be very daunting and can stop you right in your tracks, right? And I think we felt that way as well when we started back in the end of the 2016. Like, who are we, right?
Baba Julian.
Yeah, like you're nobody, right? Like
Yeah.
nobody had heard of us.
We'll have to start somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to start somewhere. And but we had huge imposter syndrome. Like I remember like with every code commit out there or thing, double checking is not ridiculous and stuff.
No typos.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely part of it. I think the more you do it though, the more confident you will become. I mean, I think that imposter syndrome never goes entirely away, but you can definitely soften it by just exposure and doing stuff. Like it's really true that the more successful stuff you put out there, the more confidence you will get. We also have this whole wins thing, like we do weekly wins to just keep track of all these great things. And if you're down, have a bad week and you're not really trusting yourself, then go back, read those wins, right? Because you will be impressed what you actually have accomplished.
I want to overlay that for network engineering. So it's really, if I go back to your first point about the more you do it, the better you will get, is that it's just like whatever thing you want to talk about, right? Like, bench press. Remember the first time you go into a gym, right? Or going on the treadmill. I'm, you probably didn't feel like a superstar or, Olympian athletes, running on there or doing bench press. But, once you start doing it, you get that flow, get that motion, and then becomes almost second nature to you. And one thing I'll add to that is you find out the thing you worry about might not be such a big deal. Like everybody in the world is going to look at your code and look at that big typo, like that pimple on your face when you were a teenager. But like, no, no, dude, don't worry about it, right? Like nobody's going to care. What they care about is how do they get value out of it. So as long as you've met one other person who's, get the value and go, oh, thank you so much. That question was stuck in my mind. I spent hours, you just solved it in 2 minutes because you went through that. And I kind of went through that as well for myself. So that was the first point. And the second point was controlling what you could control is definitely key. I couldn't tell you how it would have helped me so much in my younger years where, I was just, kind of fuming over something. But knowing what I know now, I completely agree with you on just controlling what you could control.
Yeah, like what is it? Art of War? Like you pick your battles, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You try not to focus on the things that is in the past because, you gotta just look forward. And yeah, those were great advices. So maybe we should all contribute to your donation or something, right? Because now you're giving these secret sauce away.
Well, that's what I hope to do today,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Well, the other thing is break things down into smaller chunks, right? Like if you look back at that coding platform we did back then, and now we have version 2 coming out. If you just look at the end product, like I'm not even sure how we did it. Like there's so much complexity and stuff, and people want to do a project like that, and they get stuck, right? Because they want to tackle it all at once. And this is a big thing with people that want to become Python developers or programmers, and they really get stuck on this blank page syndrome, right? And
Hmm.
because they want to solve the whole problem at once, which is not possible, right? So
Boil the ocean.
yeah, exactly. And what I literally did both times was to get a code editor running in on a web page. I didn't even care about the design yet. Just get a code editor working that can load in code and you can solve the code for which we needed to use AWS and some stuff. But I just focus on one issue, right? And okay,
Right.
got that working, then okay, expand a little bit, a little bit. And I was not worried about perfection because that was going to happen, still not going to happen, right? So perfection is the killer of any code, right? So I think it's really important to break things down into small chunks and not be afraid of making mistakes because software is not like a linear process. It's a bumpy road, right? And
Hmm.
and there will be bugs and you will have to experiment. You have to throw out entire prototypes, rewrite them, but you have to go through that process. And I think a lot of people are really afraid of making mistakes and if they look dumb in a code pull request, but you have to get over that because or you have to go through that process and the more code you write and submit, the easier that becomes.
We talked about kind of corporate toxic culture, and but there's a culture for each languages as well, right? Like certain languages, because of the maintainer or because of the ecosystem, they kind of inherit it from historical perspective. And what I would say for Python is it's very encouraging, it's very friendly, because that whole ecosystem, people forces you to be nice, even if you're nice by nature, I would say, right? Like if you just kind of come on pretty harsh on somebody, like maybe they're not as experienced, other people would jump in and go, hey, Eric, maybe you should not have said that, right? Soften that tone, put yourself back into the days when, you don't even know hello world. So be more empathetic and all that. So I think there's definitely a culture of encouragement within Python that allows you to be more, expressive and feel more comfortable. And it's no accident that I think even a few years ago, even pre-COVID, a few years ago, PyCon US was approaching like 50% speaker of female or something like that, right? Or like 50% attendees were female. They have like daycare on site. It's like, which tech conference has that? So I don't know if you have the same feeling. I'd be interested to hear it from your perspective.
Yeah, we're lucky. I haven't really hung out with a lot of other communities, but Python is, so I cannot say the best because I have hardly compared it, but it's known to be the best. Like people are super nice and like,
You look at what is it, the hot framework or any kind of coding popularity chart, right? Like it's
uh,
either number one or number two. And,
right.
where I'm in Harvard, they're teaching all the Ivy Leagues, Compute Science 101. It's all Python now.
Yeah, yeah. And but the saying is, right, like come for the language, stay for a community. And
Right.
it's really true. It is really a nice community, friendly people. And as you say, reinforcing, right? Like toxicity gets
Squashed.
squashed, exactly. So in that sense, that's a major feature of Python, the community.
Yeah. So I want to also kind of go back to what you talk about. You're documenting your small wins, and that kind of by extension fits well into, say, PyBites, for example, right? Because now you're doing things in bite size, and you could accomplish that one thing. You could document it, like you said, go back into, maybe it's in some future interviews that you could demonstrate, hey, I could actually collaborate with people through Git, and I'm not a jerk. I could actually get that pull request going because I don't know, 90% of the time it's not even technical. It's just, collaboration. So,
Mm.
into bite sizes, get that small win, document it so that encourage you further. So do you have anything else to add? Because I think that's what you've been doing for years and years. So you must have like other pointers on, bite sizing your challenges.
Yes, we made them bite-sized from the start. Well, we started with block code challenges, which were larger.
Yeah.
But I think the bite thing that really stuck with people, like I can go into the platform, do my daily thing even before coffee. And we
Yeah.
even had a coding streak calendar we left out in V2. Well, in 3 days we got it back because people loved it because you have a calendar and it shows a green for every day that you've coded. And so it's really cool that you give people, it's not only like the actual code, but also the habit building. And I think that's big because we said before, right? You need to code every day. It's like learning the piano, right? It's constant practice. And that's what programming is. So it's not only about the coding itself, it's also like building that habit, like going to the gym every day. And like you need to do it every day. It's not like a leisure thing, do it once a week. No, it's it's really something you have to do a lot. So yeah, it's cool that we found a way to have people build a habit.
For people who listen to the podcast or anytime I talk, they know I'm a huge fan of Atomic Habits, right?
Oh
And a
yeah.
lot of things that you just talked about fits right into that, like documentation and keeping track of it, even small ones that just having that green dot, and then there's one day that you woke up, you just don't want to do anything, you don't want to get out of bed even, but you look at that streak and you go, oh no, am I gonna break? I think Jerry Seinfeld, right? He talked about writing a joke.
It's just the cross on the calendar thing, right? Yeah.
Exactly. So
Yeah.
everything you talked about kind of fits into that, like the keeping a streak and forming habits, committing to time and not committing to like a certain outcome, right? Like you're not gonna committed to say, I'm gonna solve this problem, but rather I'm gonna spend 20 minutes or 25 minutes to actually gear toward solving this problem, having the confidence that eventually I'll solve it with enough effort putting it in. So I think that goes into a lot of the improvement that you did for your platform through the years of learning, like you said, you're bringing back the green check mark, right? So tell us a little bit about the improvements that you've done for V2.
Yeah, V2 is just about to come out. Probably when the episode is live, it's fully in swing, you know.
New lessons will be learned.
Outdated information.
Yeah.
No, but the process was interesting because we had this idea in mind to do the rewrite for 1 or 2 years. I think 2 years.
Okay.
Because we used movie CSS. It's a nice CSS framework, but material design and stuff, but it looked like a project, not really a product. It didn't really look professional. It also got very cluttered over time. Talking about the old platform, right? On the codechallenge.es.
Everything's new and better now. Please go check it out.
Yeah.
No, but you were talking about, sorry, I cut you off. You say, like the CSS framework that you wanted to update and so on.
Yeah, so we procrastinated on tackling this because we thought like, yeah, we need to decouple it. We need to go API first and then have a front end developer and completely decouple it.
Can I replay what you said like 10 minutes ago? Like, you're trying to boil the ocean, right? Like,
Exactly. And then a weekend, I was playing with Tailwind CSS and was doing a prototype for a Rust platform we also launched for Rust exercises,
okay.
rustplatform.com. And Julian liked that design so much. He said, like, this should be it. So I literally copy paste that code base to a new repo and started building the Python one, which has the same design. And no front-end developer we had to hire. It's just Tailwind CSS, of course, Django again, but also HTMX, right? So making it nice, responsive with Ajax calls. And yeah, so it got a lot faster and a lot cleaner. And I think the challenge really was, so we just moved the exercise across and then went very minimal. We put a lot of effort into the data migration. So when users sign in with their old account, their account gets cloned. So it's very seamless. That was a big deal.
Oh, so you didn't reuse the database. You actually, kind of transfer that over.
Part of it, yeah, just the exercises and more like the data around the exercises.
Mm-hmm.
But the users can choose. They can either let their account expire when we sunset V1. If they move over, then they will get their data. So it's all on them, right? So
Mm-hmm.
they want. That was complex, but I'm really happy that we have that because I had some people literally saying like, "Hey, I'm going into an exercise and I see the solution. I think V2 is broken." So like, no, that's actually your code. It got pulled in from the old platform, so it's really seamless. So that was a good sign to me.
You're like, thank Bob from 2 years ago. Yeah, for solving this problem. Back into learn in public, right? I mean, we joke about it, but I've had guests and myself included where I was searching for a problem and like the results came back to be like my post from 5 years ago, whatever, right? Or like
Yeah.
some kind of Reddit post that I responded to years ago. So yeah, there's kudos to build in public, learning in public that help you. Maybe that's you like 5 years after.
Can even help your future self. Yeah. But it's immensely gratifying when somebody reach out like, "Hey, I saw you had that article about how to diagnose hanging PyTest, and I found your article that helped me." So yeah, it's all about you build up an asset, right? That just earns a lot of goodwill. And again, if you go for that job or opportunity, people will see that, right? It's not only like the tech knowledge that you share, but also this guy or girl has the mindset to do that, right? To help, right? And I think that goes a long way as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Is when you demonstrate the thing, it's also the peripherals that's around it. Like you said, not be afraid. Like, so for somebody who consistently publish or consistently be like their silly selves, I've had people who were trying to make network engineering fun and cool again, and they kind of do silly things on TikTok, on Instagram, and so on. But, you have to be comfortable in your own skin. You have to be
Mm,
confident in your ability. And not to mention, you have to be like a video editing wizard, right? Like none of them
mm.
hire professionals. So it's like once you start sharing, like you kind of demonstrate not only the product itself, but also your path in coming into this product. And like you said, your mindset, your personality. And that really counts as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not easy. I mean, even if you have done it many times, there's still weeks you're like, I'm posting this week. I don't feel
back,
it.
back to that green
Yeah.
check thing, the Seinfeld,
Yeah.
streak.
Yeah. That imposter syndrome doesn't really go away. You can maybe beat it 80%. There's always a little bit there, but just remember, nobody's perfect. Yeah, there's also that notion of the sooner you make those 50,000 mistakes, the sooner you're a pro, right? So I think we just have to have that mindset like you're going to have to make a lot of mistakes. Otherwise, you're not going to learn, right? And if you can embrace that, then you're golden, I think.
That's an interesting approach. I don't think I've heard that. It's not in Atomic Habits, but so if you're gonna make all these mistakes, it's like a quota, right? You got to go through the grind, and the sooner that you get over those grind, like you pay your dues, so to speak, then you're golden. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Jeff Hamer mentioned it on our podcast the other day from How to Draw, a book. I had that quote. I can send it to you. It's a good quote.
Yeah, cool. So we're coming up. I mean, you gave a lot of good advices, and I feel like I need to go pay you somehow, just like I pay you with my audience attention, right? Like these are hard-earned lessons that not only you gone through yourself, but also how you help others to overcome, imposter syndrome, practice every day, a strong mindset, control what you could control, and so on and so forth. Is there any other recommendations that you would talk to, perhaps with a persona of a network engineer who's awesome at network engineering, but
Mm.
trying to get over that hump and learning how to be a automation engineer even.
Yeah. So I'm not too deep into networking, but I can imagine for them it's a lot of scripting.
Hmm.
So you cannot just focus on the Python. There's more you will need to learn. So there's testing, there is the tooling around it, right? With linters and CI/CD. UV is a big thing now, package management, basically. So just factor in for every hour of Python, you might also have to do an hour of software engineering and another hour of tooling, Git and GitHub, right? So there's a lot involved. Not to be discouraging, but Python would say technically it's just one third of it, there's more to it. But on the flip side, I think with network, if you have a network programming background, now you have this great niche, right? Because now you're going to learn the Python and you have the networking experience. So that's killer, right? So I think that maybe what people underestimate, like how can you really niche down or leverage your existing experience? Even if, like in my case, if I would go into finance, I have that previous experience and I put it on top of Python, you have something pretty robust, or you have somebody that works in sales. Now you add Python to it, could be very interesting, right? So I think that's the same with the network engineering. That plus then going into Python and software engineering, it's a good mix. You can speak to this, but I guess in networking and automation part is a big deal these days, right?
Yeah, I think that goes back to what Michael Kennedy was talking about, that, we don't really need a lot of coders. Like he talked about this just 10 minutes into the episode, and I would encourage people to go listen to it if you haven't, is that we may not need more coders. We need more nurses who understand coding logics. We need more doctors who could understand computer science. Yesterday morning, they announced the new Nobel Prize winner from University of Washington. And what he did was he just partnered up with Google, right? Like Google DeepMind to use, I mean, he's already an awesome biochemist. And so he kind of just married the two. So going back to what we talked about, you're already awesome in network engineering, and you have these skill sets that are good enough to, earn a living out of it. So if you just branch out, even know a little bit about Python coding, logical conditionings, then you're building on top of that. Now you're even more powerful. You get your superpower into the original field of network engineering. So that's a great point. I love that. I think not many people have talked about it. They always focus on, now that I'm competing with the 23-year-old. No, you're competing with the 23-year-old on this part, plus that original platform that you're already on. So that's a great point.
Right, that 23-year-old might outrun you with the code, right? But they don't have the work experience or the networking context, right, that you have. So I think the work experience goes a long way. But also, if you go into software engineering now, we do have AI tools and stuff. So you can learn it faster.
I was wondering when we're going to start talking about AI, but yeah, hey, there you go. Hour into our conversation, there's AI.
But I do notice like how fast you can get scripting done. So I think
Mhm.
it is my advice to then aim high and go into more like the senior software roles where it's more about software design and thinking solutions. Because I do think that if it's only about writing script A to do B, that's becoming more automatable these days.
Yeah, I mean, if, computer science or scripting or any kind of, coding challenge is only about the commands, then you will hire the fastest typist to do it, right?
Mm.
Like, the
Mm.
fastest typist will be the best programmer, the best network engineer, but they're not, because it's all going behind that. So you kind of leave that syntax and you kind of leaving all that basic stuff to maybe AI, but you start focusing on the higher level designs, the architect, the things that are not yet being replaced by AI. I think that's your point. Anything else you want to add?
If you combine a Python to solve network programming problems in a very specific context, then I
Hmm.
think you're good. So maybe that's not that much of a concern.
Yeah, the internal optimistic Bob there. So, yeah, I mean, I've met people who are, on both sides, right? But I kind of gear toward the optimistic side as well. Is just like, hey, leverage it, learn how to use it. You don't need to worry about AI. You need to worry about other people who knows AI usage better than you. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
They're going to be replaced by AI, but by the engineer that uses it, right?
yeah, that could be more productive. So I think we could probably chat about this all day, for another day, but we are coming up on time. So I want to thank you again for being here, Bob. I think it's so great to catch up and to learn about the new platform, to learn about your lessons. And I thank you again for being here. So where can people find you either on social, your platforms, and just the work that you do?
Yeah, and thank you for having me. That's been awesome fun. So I'm on X, B Belderbos. Not posting that regular anymore, but the Python tips I usually do there. On LinkedIn, B Belderbos, more longer posts, less frequent, but I do post. We have a Python community on Circle, so it's pybites.circle.so, I think.
Yeah. Well, we'll put the link in the show notes.
Yeah, and the new platform is already live at pybitesplatform.com.
Okay.
So don't go to codechallenge.es, that's old. Go to pybitesplatform.com, and
Okay.
I think those are the main ones. Yeah.
Okay, cool, cool. I mean, I would imagine as an entrepreneur, you're super busy, and as somebody who's is constantly improving on your sites and your craft and your skills, that you don't have that much time on posting. You want him posting on X, or you want him to like develop the next kick butt, pipe bites exercise, right? Like I would choose the latter. So yeah, thanks again for being here, and best of luck with all the projects, pipe bites especially, and coaching.
Great. Thanks for having me, Eric. This was fun.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Network Automation Nerds. Do you have any feedbacks for network automation, our guest Bob today, or this episode? Send us some follow-ups at packetpushers.net/FU, where FU stands for follow-up. We want to hear from you. Check out our website at packetpushers.net to find other network engineering focused podcasts, blogs, YouTube videos, and so much more. You can find podcasts such as Network Break for weekly news, Heavy Networking for deep dives, Packet Protector for security, and much more. We thank you again for listening to the show. And last but not least, remember that too much network automation will never be enough.